Hello, everyone, and welcome to Randstad RiseSmart's Career Podcast, helping you transform your everyday work life into an exciting and rewarding career. I'm your host, Kimberly Schneiderman. With 10 plus years experience in coaching, writing, and training, I'm passionate about delivering ideas, insights, tools, and resources to people like you, people focused on achieving their career goals. Together, we'll explore how you can identify your career passions, set your career goals, and achieve everything you work toward in your career. Our experts are career industry practitioners with deep experience in HR and corporate leadership. They are seasoned coaches in the area of career growth, workplace communications, succeeding in a current role, enhancing work satisfaction, managing priorities and stressors, building a personal brand, and strengthening valuable internal networks. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with your colleagues. You can also follow me at KJ Schneiderman on Twitter or on YouTube on the RiseSmart Career channel. Better yet, sign up for coaching services on the Randstad RiseSmart portal so that you can benefit from everything we talk about. Now, on with the show. Welcome everyone to today's episode. Today we're talking to Chuck Schmidt. Chuck is a coach with RiseSmart's work-life coaching program. And the interesting thing about Chuck is that he was actually practicing coaching long before he formally entered the profession. During his 20-year career with BASF, including more than 12 years on the executive floor, Chuck really prided himself on being a mentor to the talented and motivated professionals that reported to him each day. And during the course of his leadership, he had 48 mentees whom he successfully guided through their career development and transitions. And all of them are currently thriving in senior level positions. Chuck describes his coaching style as both strategic and soulful. Welcome to the show, Chuck.
Thanks for having me, Kimberly. Looking forward to it.
All right. And so today we're talking about taking a big swing in your career. And we're going to explore the approach and strategies that Chuck has used to help people identify what's important to them and what they really want to accomplish in their careers. And I'm sure our audience is going to gain some valuable ideas to help them along their career journey. So Chuck, are you ready to get started?
Can't wait.
All right. So let's start with the foundation. Where do we begin with a topic as big as helping people identify what's important to them and what they really want to accomplish?
Yeah. So by far, Kimberly, in my experience, the biggest barrier to actually having somebody really take that big swing in their career is their own misperceptions. It's their own hangups. So the biggest challenge and frankly, as a coach, one of the things that gives me the greatest sense of satisfaction is really helping people get out of their own way.
Gotcha. And I'm sure there's an overarching methodology you use. Can you set up our audience to understand that methodology?
Sure. What I really try to do in the beginning is work with my partner, with my client, to really, in a completely unconstrained world, articulate what great would look like. So what does great look like? And of course, what immediately comes are all the reasons why great can't happen. So I don't want to hear about that in the beginning. So there are no constraints. Imagine you have your hand on the wheel of fate and you could actually write your own job description with a clean sheet of paper. What would that look like? What would you be doing? What kind of an environment would you be in? Don't worry about the job description. That first step in really getting people to think in possibilities. In my whole life, I guess it's been a blessing and a curse for me that I think in possibilities. I see possibilities all the time, and I really try to encourage the people I work with to do the same. So imagine what great would look like.
And how do people do that? Do you think it's easy for them? What kind of paradigms do you see people holding on to?
People often bear the scars of their experiences, right? Nobody will ever consider me for that because, name your reason. And, a lot of that's real based on their experiences, but that's in the past. I really try to encourage clients to really think about the future. So it's really kind of a three-step process to vision the future and really absolutely do that without constraints. Okay, so now that we have the sort of the golden vision for you, now let's come back to let's interject a little dose of reality, because we do live in the real world, and there are constraints, right? There are barriers between you and this ideal next state that you aspire to. So
didn't we? I'm going to interrupt you, Chuck.
Sure.
Didn't you just say that there should be no constraints? Why the shift in the conversation?
So because I think it's really important that people don't defeat themselves right out of the gate, and not pursue things that are close to their heart or that they really want, because they've already introduced a constraint. And because of this constraint, I'm not even going to talk about this, even though it's what deep in my heart, it's what I really want to do. I'm not even going to go there, because I've already eliminated it because of constraint. I don't want that to happen. I really want to get at, what is really in this person's head and heart, mostly the heart. What do they really want to do? And the best way to do that is to play this game of, there are no constraints. You can have whatever you want. What would it be? Then in the second step, you realize you begin to talk about these constraints, because there are some. Maybe there are educational barriers. Maybe there are experiential barriers. Whatever the case may be, something that the person really needs to do to address these barriers. So the next step is to identify really all the barriers, no matter how small. Let's get it out on the table. So now that we have this grand vision for you, Kimberly, what would derail it? What would stop it? Why wouldn't somebody give that to you, that opportunity?
Definitely. So let's dive into the first two parts a little bit deeper. So with that first step, you talked about it being the visioning part, where you're really talking about what's deep in your heart and holding no constraints. Can you tell us some of the questions that you might ask a client, or how you navigate to find out that? Because I imagine that people come to that conversation with those constraints completely entrenched in their thinking already. So how are you kind of working through that and trying to dig through those preconceived constraints to get to the non-constrained thinking?
Sure. So really, it sounds simple, but it really isn't. Just to think about if the world were completely up to you, right, and you had total control over what your next opportunity would be, what would it be? What kind of things give you energy, as opposed to take energy away from you? What kind of things give you fulfillment, as opposed to taking that away from you? And really, sometimes it helps to even begin very abstract, just talking in concepts, and then focusing that down into something that looks more like a professional opportunity.
So you're not asking the question straight out, what is it that you want? You're asking all of these other questions and getting at just some information about the person, and asking these abstract questions to help you put together a picture.
A lot of times, I've had this happen a number of times, where there's a difference between a client's identity and who they identify as and what they really want. A lot of people have been in roles and functions for 10, 20 years that frankly they hate, but it's what they do, and it's what delivers a paycheck. And so getting over a lot of those initial hurdles as well, that, well, I can't possibly do anything else because this is what I've always done. This is what I do. This is how you make the donuts. I'll date myself with that old Dunkin' Donuts commercial, right? This is how I make the donuts, and you know what? Maybe you shouldn't be making donuts. Maybe you should be making pies or cupcakes or something else, because that's going to make you a lot happier.
So that's interesting. Thank you. And then dealing with the constraints or identifying them, are you ever surprised about the constraints that you hear from people?
Yeah, every day. And we're having an open conversation here about this, and that's okay. But what's important for people listening to the podcast, this is a no judgment zone, right? This is a completely open, safe environment that we're talking about here as we identify the constraints. So, often constraints will be cultural based, gender based. A lot of times there are gender-based, perceived or real barriers. a lot, what's at the root of a lot of them are people not valuing themselves and what they have accomplished and the skill set and competencies that they've developed and what they really have to offer and what's transferable. A lot of times people just can't see that they actually already have 90% of what they need in order to make that career transition, but it's that 10% that they can see that they don't have that defeats them out of the gate.
Gotcha. Okay. And I think you teased us a little bit by telling us the next part of things. Once you've identified that vision, once you've identified the reality, the constraints that really do exist, it's time to move into taking action. It's time to get into. Tell us a little bit.
It's time to get down to brass tacks. So really going through each of these constraints and having a conversation around what you, as the client, are prepared to do to solve that particular constraint. And so my role is to really ask those kinds of questions, to really get at the root of that constraint and help the client identify tangible steps to take that are comfortable for them to basically go around or through that particular barrier. And so systematically developing an action plan for each of these barriers to eliminate each of these barriers, at the conclusion of which this best positions the person to compete for that ideal next role.
So you and I have been talking in abstracts for a while. Do you have an example of a time where you followed this methodology with a client?
Yeah, I got a couple of them.
Great.
So, I'll start with actually one of my favorite clients. And I guess I'll withhold the name to protect the innocent. But she was, I will say, a senior manager, maybe a director level, sort of at that step, right at the precipice of entering into the executive ranks. And she was really struggling at the company she was working at, and it actually eventually led to her leaving that company because she had what she felt was an unconventional leadership style, or a leadership style that wasn't really valued. She was working, I don't want to point fingers in industry, she was working in the insurance industry, which she described as a pretty formal, serious, hierarchical kind of a structure. And, she was not. I mean, she was funny, and she had the ability to really use humor effectively to motivate people. She had some very unconventional ways to reward people. Some of the things that and the parties and events that she would hold in the office to really recognize people and inspire people she felt like it wasn't really valued, and in some ways painted her almost as unserious to a lot of the upper management. So she had this paradigm in her head that she had kind of maxed out. She had hit this ceiling, and not because she was a woman, but because of this leadership style that she had. And I tell you, that is an amazing leadership style. I mean, it was one of the first things we did is really help her understand how unbelievably unique she is and how impactful that leadership style is. And so we really kind of talked through, is it really a glass ceiling? You think there's a glass ceiling there, but is that, that is a symptom, right? That's a symptom of the experience that she had at that insurance company, was that this sort of fun, engaging leadership style was a career limiter for her. And so really helping her understand that that's actually not the case, that leadership style is unique and she's unique. And this really allows her to do things that actually few leaders can do. And so, really taking her out of that situation that she was in the insurance company with these questions, what would great look like? And she kept coming back to these just unbelievable human interactions that she had with colleagues, with team members, and how much fun she had, at work. That word fun kept coming up. And so we basically started to paint what would an ideal role look like. And it was an executive level role in that kind of environment. We then talked about constraints. So, what are the constraints? And frankly, one of the constraints, her whole career had been in the insurance industry. So, one of the constraints was, if I might need to consider other industries. So, how am I going to get over that barrier that I'm just an insurance professional and this automotive or this pharma or this construction company, wouldn't be interested in somebody who's spent her whole career in the insurance industry. So really systematically identifying what she could do to best prepare herself and position herself for candidacy in those roles. We contracted with each other. And at that point, my role shifts to now being an accountability partner. So really working with her, checking in with her, helping her work through roadblocks that popped up along the way. And in the end, she did shift industries and ended up with a vice president level role, actually reporting directly to the CEO, being responsible for a significant change management activity at that company. So it was the perfect role for her. And to this day, she's just thrilled.
That's great. Can you tell me what kind of constraints popped up along the way during this transition with her?
So one was, the first was to really, and this is going to sound strange, to get her comfortable with being her. Because she had assumed and she was miserable, by the way, in a lot of ways, she had assumed a persona that she thought was the persona that was valued at that company. And so first working through, not only should you not sort of inhibit these leadership qualities you have, you got to unleash them, turn the volume up. Don't turn the volume down, turn the volume up. So that was a big part of the constraints initially. And then as far as navigating the path to what she wanted to do, it was really twofold. One was the industry barrier that I had already mentioned, and the second was not only was there an industry barrier, but she had never held a senior executive role before. So that's a tall ask, right? To change industries and make a significant jump in level at the same time. So, but she had the chops, she had the skills. I mean, the stories that she could tell, the story she told me about how she moved her team, how she moved the whole organization, through this infectious leadership style. I knew she had the ability to do it. So it was really helping her see that, and then working with her to best bring that across, in networking conversations, in interviews, in discussions with recruiters, in her branding, how she was representing herself on things like LinkedIn and resumes and bios, really telling that story and bringing across this rare and unique blend of inspirational leadership, situational leadership, humor, and this drive to results, bringing this rare blend together. So it was really first getting her out of her own way, and then really working through, okay, you can do this. You can do this. Now we're to a place, you can do this. So let's talk about what do you need to do to best position yourself for these roles in terms of telling the right story around how if this is the right time for you to transition into industries, and the value you bring coming from another industry into a new industry, as well as this legacy of impact on people that you've had and how that best positions you now for this senior executive role.
I love how your story really demonstrates each of the parts of your methodology, creating that vision for what she wanted and helping her embrace the ways that she was different than most of the people probably surrounding her within her industry. And yet those differences were likely extremely valued even there. And she needed to bring them somewhere that where she could, just be out loud with who she was and how she did things. I love that you and she worked together on dealing with the constraints along the way. The fact that she was trying to up level as well as change industries, that is a tough nut to crack by conventional wisdom. And so you talked about the story. And I think one of the things that our listeners can take from that is making sure that you have your story in place about why you're ready for this move. And our listeners are likely thinking about internal moves, and they still will need a story to tell, and they still will need to own the identity that they want to bring to work each day that helps empower them to do their work in that unique way that's really valued. So that's amazing. I also love the way your story talks about removing the barriers, addressing the barriers. And one thing I'd like to get in a little bit more deeper with you is for the general population of clients that you're working with or that we're working with within the work-life coaching program, especially, What are we going to do about the barriers that do actually exist? Once we identify those skilling or education barriers or other things that might exist, let's talk about that for a minute.
Yep. So there's a couple of ingredients to that, in my opinion. So first, you need a plan. If it's an educational barrier, what is the plan, right? Where are you going to go to get those skills or that education that you need? If it's an experiential barrier, how can you even in your current role flex up, to get some exposure and get some experience under your belt in that particular area. If it's an organizational or networking challenge, what are you going to do to begin to tap these other sources of contacts, network, and support? So you need a plan, and you need a partner. Or partners, right? So maybe it's your manager, maybe it's a mentor, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a direct report, but having people around you that can support you in getting that education or getting that experience or expanding that network, I think is really important as well.
Thank you. And you helped kind of tie the loose ends together of this approach that we were talking about today with the 3 parts: the visioning, the admitting the reality and addressing the constraints, and then actually taking some steps to get around or get through those barriers. Yeah. What are 3 things that you could tell our listeners that they can do today to get started on this path for themselves?
So the first one is don't settle. Don't defeat yourself right out of the gate. So that would be the first takeaway is, take that big swing for the fence. Don't settle. That's one of the first things that I do when I have a new client and we start talking. I really try to stretch that person's thinking so as not to settle, to really, sometimes a career change or in the context of a work-life coaching engagement, personal development or professional development, that can be scary, but this is a wonderful opportunity. It's a gift, to make a step change in your own enjoyment personally and professionally. So don't waste the gift. Take the big swing. It's the first thing. The second thing is really don't try to do this on your own. Whether it's a coach or whether it's your supervisor, your spouse, your significant other, a coworker, talk about it, avail yourself of other people's experiences. That can be really, really helpful, and don't do it alone. And the third thing I would say is don't give up, keep plugging away. Anything worth having is worth fighting for. And oftentimes, it's a lot of hard work. This coming back to the example that I shared, she was actually, when I first met her, in a place where she was thinking about walking away from leadership because of this.
Oh, wow.
And going back to an individual contributor role, just because she felt like she was broken in some way, and that was what a tragic mistake that would have been for corporate America. She's amazing. And so, working through, and like I say, the takeaways, think big, take a big swing. Don't do it alone. Use the resources that you have available that are around you, and don't give up. Keep plugging away.
That's great. Thank you, Chuck. A final question. The question I ask all of my podcast guests. What's a book that you're recommending and why?
So I do most of my reading for leisure, for pleasure. So,
okay.
I'm an experiential learner. So most of the professional learning I do by doing. I will say one thing that fantasy adventure. So think J.R.R. Tolkien or think R.A. Salvatore. I think in possibilities, and I like not being limited. And this is going to sound strange. I enjoy chaos because chaos means there's opportunities. Chaos means possibilities. If everything's running like a top and there's very structured order, where's the development potential in that? And so, really fantasy adventure really helps my mind, take the governor off and just run at 1,000 miles an hour. And I find it really refreshes me and actually it energizes me to really come back to this creative space I enjoy so much.
That's great. I love how you tie your personal preferences in life to the genre of reading that you do. And I might have to have you back to talk about that whole idea of chaos and discovering possibilities in chaos. That sounds like a pretty juicy topic itself.
It really is.
All right. Yeah. Chuck, thank you for being with us today. And thank you to our listeners for being here today as well. If you would like to learn more about Chuck, you can find him on LinkedIn, Chuck Schmidt, Schmidt. He also is a coach in the Randstad work-life coaching program. So you can connect with him in the RiseSmart portal, and he could be your coach. Everybody, thank you for being with us today. And until next time, thank you, Chuck.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Randstad RiseSmart Career Podcast, helping you transform your everyday work life into an exciting and rewarding career. I thank our expert today and encourage you to tune in for our next episode, where we continue talking about how you can identify your career passions, set your career goals, and achieve everything you want to work toward in your career. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with your colleagues. You can also follow me at KJ Schneiderman, that's KJSCHNEIDERMAN, on Twitter or on YouTube on the RiseSmart Career channel. You can also sign up for coaching services in the Randstad RiseSmart portal so you can directly benefit from everything we talk about.